Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Actually, this time in visit to before Canada, we visit to UK. And during that time, we prepared some teaching in English. My teacher is from England, English teacher is from England. She very much sort of encouraged me to speak in English in England. I told her, oh, I will try, I will see. Maybe it's not, I'm not so sure, but I will try. We did some kind of draft, something like that. After we reached England, English people, they speak very good English. They speak very quick and very good. I said, oh, maybe better not speak. Better don't speak.
Better not to speak.
Better not speak English. Now in Canada, again, even though in Canada they have officially maybe one or two.
Two official languages.
Two official languages, but the English is the sort of major language.
Majority.
Yeah, majority. Again, I think it's not a good idea to speak in English. If next time I'm in Italy, maybe I can try. Maybe like an Asian country, maybe I can speak some English. 다 드네 다른 쇼베 가져도 지 실험 제보사지 가져다 디고 게시하래 안데 시 닐루사데 닐루스마다 지단 실험 제보디 구림신도 게 마시아르지 근데 기게 삼로메
라서
간다야 지 가져야 다 실험 제숨사 게제대당 게제텔이 최네 연두산에 안 다나 쇼베 슈베나 신기 언지 우니 주세난 장도 야나지 다가나 리얼리티 토하는 아주 삼당시 금세 삼당 과대 계속 차려야です 디지 근세 삼당 들이차디 지 캐바로 지 친이지고 캐바 philosophical 캐바 되게 레가르지다 고즈기 professional 고즈기 첼레르지 되게 많이 봐 마란수기 미즈디에 다 tinsa turin yusajibe nalolya misusu mizide ngale kyangchi karshweda ji miziki rintangi tasho ina are dana singi kanji thone imenya ko yage senen randu yana ji tatsu sabar jung yebe indusan di koblya azu ngeba do gyunze samdong kwa jigda gyunze samdang be thone azu ki misi ki ningbu senen randu yana ji rinang di de yage kombe kanjis tangu wa 이 삼다디 개치부 차대어를 삼통이.
This morning, I began our exploration of the triad that is famous in Buddhist teachings, that of ground, path, and fruition. So I didn't have any particular special or specific plan of how to present these three in sequence. But in any case, we began our discussion by exploring the meaning of the term ground and how it relates to the basic nature of things, or the actual condition of reality. We talked about how it's important, or how we might feel invited or encouraged to adopt a relationship to reality in which we reflect on reasons as a support for our approach to life. We talked about how developing a correct view of reality is not just a special domain for scholars or philosophers, but rather is something that is applicable and indeed very much needed in this 21st century, in our day-to-day lives, even more than before. I think that when it comes to such topics of the value of human life and what types of ideas are we espousing in relation to that human life, it's very important for us to develop a clear view that is based upon reason. So therefore, I think it's crucial for us all to develop clarity in our thoughts and clarity in our views about the essential value of human life, its preciousness, and reflect on the question of how we might further our ability to cherish and value our lives.
다드네 가라시름 제부게 람기 남샤 섬레 람레 최시 다시 도드르치 시아기 베즈슈기.
Now, I will attempt to offer a brief, condensed presentation of the second component of ground, path, and fruition. I'll attempt to say a few words about the path.
다지랑기 남규 아주지 토마 나바상게베 지 초고리아 슈베급리아 군조 숨기 군조 숨기다 문지세 상계 최 긴류숨 사디 문지시합스고 다디 가수지 아바상게베 최기 자와선에서 닝부스는 자도 가다 데임레 다 군조숨 뭐르세 뉴스단에 아니 상계디 람템바보 다 람가 땡겐선에 자도 지 가이드 더치 더 최tem바보선에 자도 람가 지 타베 람조세 람가 땡겐 니지 칭겐디 차데요레스 아니 최디 그런 조세를 남디 차데요레스 안다 긴뒤디 lam zhube cho seran rado lamda lamli an zhudu san nyamdo roro rubjiti en gindu chade yore chishi de ngo zhi chi yore.
When it comes to the path, the most fundamental components of the path, as taught traditionally in Buddhism, are what are known as the three jewels. So, whenever we enter into the gateway of Dharma, it's taught that relying upon the three jewels as the fundamental supports for our path is very important. The three jewels in this way are considered the root and the heart of all Buddha Dharma. So to introduce the three jewels in brief, they are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha is taught to be the one who shows us the path, the main guide for our path, the one who knows the way to traverse the path and can show us how to travel the path. The Dharma is the path itself. The Dharma is the path that we travel, the path to liberation. And the Sangha is our companionship on the path, those who support and help us to accomplish the path, those who help to ensure that we progress along the path and to travel the path together with us.
다들 이 산에 지금 최 랑 제가 최디 다 람더부치 지금 답을 지금 답에게 배지 미유 지금 답을 탐지 캠페 공파선을 저도 딱 간다 liberation 다들이 이제 레세게 레슨 조세게 랑가로 때 최레스 드시게 봐. 지당 아주기 듄리야 랑가 남균에 지 랑가 망부지 알아. 조세게 choice 말베다 지 당과 망부지 알아. 랑가 하시엘라 남균에 지 미망부 로뇽와 세난라도 다지 this familiar somewhere ji gyuru yede tenjega langa mangbusta yode a langa khashelia ngazo shira minjunyo myabche and the ji langa delia chimbina kanje chogye the ji familiar sanadado ngazo ji shira hamagoya tenjega langa ji mangbuchi yode yare namgyu mi mangbuchi gi damga cha langa di ji 마체데 지 규예베서는 미망부 조세랑가 안 디토리아 당과 체체 그래서랑 아주 상물로 가라한 좀 규예베서 패밀리 인상 디랑가든 주어래 저 답되어래 신다 랑가디 미시란 주님이야와 진짜 랑가 쉐비나 디 랑가디 지 년가를 지체 야나지 딜리아지 도버를 사체 되는 저 치대식이요.
So in particular, from among the three jewels, it is the jewel of the Dharma that constitutes the path. So overall, you can say that our destination, or our final goal, is the state of liberation, or the state of omniscient Buddhahood. And the path that takes us to that destination is the Dharma. Generally speaking, however, there are many paths that lie before us and many choices before us of which path we might go down or which path we might follow. Some of the paths before us are familiar to us, and we are aware of many other people that have gone down those paths or followed those paths. And some other paths are not so familiar to us, and we aren't so acquainted with many people who have followed those paths. And so our usual choice is that we choose the more familiar path. We consider the more familiar path to be the safest and most convenient option because we know more about it and we know more people who have chosen it. And conversely, we consider the unfamiliar paths to be the more dangerous choice because we don't know what those paths entail and we don't know many people who have followed those paths. So usually it is the unfamiliar paths that we turn away from.
Today, you say, that the Gushida maybe a langa jilia. That was she, you say, Delia, curious seminar, so much of that. Delia, some tick Kashra. Langadina, she ran Ronya Meza, Gisena, curious, some of that. Or the Chimina, Kajay on Royana, some of Chigi. Samsung as with Jagi, Kashra. Tele Troarusle, Tele Tonarusle on the other. Yimbina Digi, Langati, Tola, Jonyung Gengi, Midi, Nyunza. Gazetisity, Langati go gazetisity. That when you say Zimato, Mimang Star Ragama. Jaza the Dinga Zugi, Chur Yamin Chev Godolia, Gary Senior Sadi, Mazuji Lamna Tingi. Guide the genius. Just like Sangedi, as you guide the Shubiba. Sanged of the Minatang Azuji, Koran Kashrodaji. Nar Sanged of the guide Nimbud, Manguma, Lotonrani, Nelia, and the Sangi Sade, Langadina Chimbres. Chinjia and Taji, Koran Suyonji did the Shebre Saji. That day, Gazeti. Shorting and Azuliati, Lord Tontangi Gijerua.
That's all.
Cesadi Kashua de Tindiji, Teta Maimba, Tadang Azuki, living person somewhere. Tata Jibe gave Shini Sade, Tataran, Be Langa de la Be, Pa Shigni, Chuchen de somewhere. Tindiji. That living some person to those who have in Dusana, tea guided tension, Roga Sadi, Kashimbresa, Takana, Zodi. That Yimbina gave Sinian dig to Talanga de Chibina and Tadu Koran de Jungre Sati. Kashuetaji Mi use an Andrado, Kanda tea qualia or Payenda and the G, the Nizumachi. Sunguare. The Sumbi Minea, Mazo ta Tamatelia Tadun, the Langa de Tarim Shuji of Chen. The Nidusane, Teleala, or Lela, which may be in Dusane, Mazu Migergin Hene. Susulia Bed, Yishi Sen and Dahano. Yanachi Lotacho was sent down. The Rijquadi, Kashim Shadi or something. If you don't know some words, you can ask me.
Okay.
Free to ask me.
Oh, thank you very much.
No problem.
I really appreciate it.
Old friend.
Thank you. We're all in a living room together. I will take you up on that offer, sir.
Actually, this time, Tyler is my interpreter in London. Then he can go back to America. And in Canada, supposed to be somebody else will translate me. But he is sick, unfortunately. And first day I heard this, this message. I received this message. I'm shocked. Well, no translator, that means I need to speak English? That is not good news. Then, fortunately, we get invite Tyler. Yeah, now I can relax.
Thank you. But please don't relax too much because I might need you to correct me.
Oh, I thought I can have short nap, short sleep.
Maybe not quite that
Okay.
much.
Okay.
So on the one hand, the paths that we're not familiar with seem more scary and can seem like the ones that we'd want to turn away from. But on the other hand, sometimes it's precisely the lack of familiarity that is attractive to us. So sometimes we can feel curious about paths that we have yet to follow for the very reason that we have never been down that path. And we can come to have a sense of delight and increased attention about what that path might be like. But at the same time, if we want to actually start a journey on that path, there's not that many people that we can consult with because there are far fewer people who have been down that path. In the context of the Dharma, the people who we try to consult with, who are familiar with these more rarely chosen paths, are the spiritual friends, the teachers. Originally, it was the Buddha Shakyamuni who went down this path and traversed the path all the way through to its final ultimate destination of full enlightenment. And so therefore, for the path to awakening overall, the Buddha is considered the most authoritative guide. But nevertheless, the Buddha took that journey over 2,500 years ago. And so even though the Buddha's teachings and the Buddha himself are an authoritative guide for the path,
It's become story.
it has become a story. And therefore, we need to rely on a more recent source of information for the path sometimes. A living person who we can trust has traversed some of the path and can relay some details about the path to us, details that are needed, and details that we can have confidence in. This is very important, and this indicates the very important role of relying upon a living spiritual friend. Someone who can encourage us, remind us about the benefits of the path, and remind us about the ultimate goal of our traveling the path. But even still, even if we rely upon a living spiritual friend, at the end of the day, we still have a long journey to take all by ourselves. And arriving at our destination is not going to be easy. And therefore, when it comes right down to it, it's very important for us individually to develop a sense of trust and confidence about what we are doing, where we are going on the path, as well as a sense of decisiveness.
Tani ju sa ne. Chi chue chi ju sa ne. Ta ji ka chue. Ma re. Cho chin da che sang a ju. Cham zam. Nga ju she ju san da ji. Su 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 su. 지 랑로 랑로 고도 마 주어 섬어베
Lasa.
고도 마 주어 세나라도 다가다 수수기 지네 수수수다 하고 세나라도 지 가서다 많아 나 대마시죠 참섬 아주다 가서다 闲了一起钱的，让了一起钱的，来哪有的事情，这里用的吧？
Lasa.
这个我那前面呢，这让了一起钱的，闲了一起钱来，来哪有关系去了？他这个说，这让了让搞他们就什么了？他这银山，就说这一些年来哪有的事情？因为啊。 수수수수리야 참참 지 가르다지 수수 세보 마통치 지 러신 가리면 세보 자 마통치 수수 드린 주산에 디균센 때네 아니 지 랑랑 이시게야 돼 갈라 하고 싶자 돼야지 이래도 지금 최냠린 체 것도리야 다 랑랑 이시 세는 자도 랑라 딩쇠다 지 이시에 갈라 간섬지 매비미나 안지 최ኛ의 자사데 가 하고신 됩시 대유산다等于 랑가티나로야 조연주산에 갈라간섬지 소소래야 최심 템포선다도 로타 최고 다는 신기 로자 템포 이시 템포 든지지 매비미나 아니 지 용토야 매비지 민주산에 다 디규세데 최ኛ의 시주산에 갈래 가서다지 랑랑 이시 게야도 개침으로 이나디 대라버지 참참 동문들서
So to travel this long journey to awakening, this path that we call the Dharma, we need to trust ourselves at the end of the day. On the one hand, we can see how sometimes it is easier to trust ourselves than it is to trust others. It's easier to have confidence in our own perspective, more so than it is to have confidence in the perspective of others, because after all, our own experience is clearly evident to ourselves. We ourselves are not hidden from ourselves. So we know our own experience, and therefore we can trust ourselves. But on the other hand, sometimes we don't see ourselves so clearly. We're not so sure about what our true nature is. And we encounter moments when we feel that it is difficult to trust ourselves. And so this becomes a very rich meeting point for our Dharma practice. The practice of Dharma has a lot to do with developing confidence in oneself and learning to trust oneself. If we don't have a little bit of ability to trust ourselves, then it will be very difficult for our Dharma practice to move forward on the path in any type of clear way. If we don't have some stable commitment to the Dharma, some stable confidence in ourselves, then it will be difficult for our Dharma path to progress. So therefore, trust and confidence in oneself is very important for practicing the Dharma, but at the same time, trust and confidence in oneself is sometimes difficult to find.
Tene Yustane, da, Chikashwe, da, Chik practice Dharma Chevikalia, spend lots of time similar to Tuzu Mangushivsi to sort of search Sanatakaduta, so search true, search yourself, somewhere that you so Karim Magic search Haji. Dana Singi to learn how to sort of just socially that you boba gea, Rani Senior with Chia. Digi, Topsy country of a dig Dolia to Zumangutana Chida. Dana is how to reach richness summary. Ranigi, that is goody, Pusum Sovereignty. Yawachu, Tinted Chialipera, Jig, Kashwada, Tuzumanguchi, as a Tangiaris.
Rangigu, Punzum
Rich.
Rich.
Yourself, somewhere with that.
Enrich yourself.
Yeah.
Lasa. Chug Yamlin Chedu. Lasa. So when we practice the Dharma, we spend a lot of time searching for truth within ourselves, searching to find out exactly who and what we are, learning how to develop confidence in ourselves and in our insights, and enriching ourselves with genuine positive qualities. We spend a lot of time in these endeavors when we practice the Dharma.
Dana Tadu Miyun Drosadi, Tadangazu Langa or Gishedusane. It means you can reach some place. It's called Kashwadaji, liberation. In a Tangwe Nisu Tolia, there's a place to Lene, liberation Chana's Mayim. That's also the Langatel Chine, Kali. Langatelia, Kashwaji, Nyamyonsa, Energy Guya Chana, Tamatadelia, Suzuki lesson, some of Bataji, Pige, Lobjon to Tama Ratsa Dusane, and a Shineji, Kashwaji, Suzuki true nature, Karim, but the Susu Hakoche. Dana Singi, Daji, Rangaran Guya, but a child Dusana, and a Shineji liberation Saji, Yoayavichi. The party so the Lobjon Cha part of Chimaji, Unetanji, such as a lesser of you have a chick. The Nijiki, Nisamas.
Lasa? And so when we discover that this process of searching oneself is actually the main practice of Dharma, we begin to see that the notion of path and destination is simply a metaphor. We begin to see that there's not an actual place called liberation that is a literal destination that we could arrive at. But the true reality is more like we're simply becoming more and more familiar with ourselves, and traversing the path means gaining more and more experience of seeing our own true nature. So when we start to see our own true nature more and more clearly, then we're really traversing the path, and that's when we really arrive at the destination, which is called liberation. And when we understand this, then we know that liberation isn't some place that is outside, but rather that the path is simply a process of learning.
Ninju sana di part sa di benaji. Jigni gozu, jigni end of charge. More like in and out, somewhere.
Lasa.
Circle in and out. Da dang wo ji out of she, and then in to charge, and galiji, rang or rang tre, the charge. Liji, but the child uses something.
Lasa. So we come to learn that the path isn't a process in which there is one place that is the beginning and another place that is the end. In fact, a more accurate metaphor might be, instead of the pair of beginning and end, the pair of in and out. First, we start on the outer levels, or the outer rungs, the outer circumference, as it were. And we proceed in a way that brings us closer and closer in, until finally we recognize ourselves. We recognize our own true nature.
Telea jingege, tanyam yor shevina. Tanam yung as you give Takarshwe. Further development, someone with that Chenyam Chavina, that is by compared to drivers. The Rizing Azuki, a lot of skill. That other dig, Deba Magawa, Tade Sisti, Jusun Deba Magache, Telegi, Tadegi, Susuneran Karim, Deba Magache, Telegi, Set Torusida, Telegi, Meduchonata, Tele Haleverci, Gonaroci, Ushadi. Tada did this human two original some of the ordinary. It's just like too ordinary, too simple. Dajang Azudi more beji, attractive summary. Daji more amazing Digi, Arabici, Azudum the Chandy.
To speak about this principle of recognizing one's own true nature and getting to know oneself from a personal perspective, our usual way of thinking is that we always want things to be better than the way they are now. We consider, or we have a habit of considering, that the things for ourselves as they are now are a little bit too plain, a little bit too simple, a little bit too ordinary. And we want things to change in a way that will make our experience more attractive, more amazing. I think we all have this habit of thinking to some degree.
More consume the chair, not much sort of like appreciation. Consume the shuk chair, appreciation stam adding. Kadina that ya best, wonderful. That's it, but now as a church should be in there, church this Tawa Tor. She check it Tor. She decided should be mina, and that she shouldn't do it. She said, "It's a tomna in toss on some barbershop." Then I'm using 2 more church to get the toss on. That is what the Camares of Sarochi. That dredging has a train on a chair of this consume material to consume this young girl.
We can bring this habit of thinking into our Dharma practice as well, and approach the Dharma with a materialistic or consumeristic mentality. So even when it comes to Dharma teachings, we want something better, we want something wonderful, we want something high and rare. So when we think about receiving Dharma teachings, we want to receive the highest Dharma teachings with the most profound and rare terms and so forth. And if we manage to receive what we consider to be the teachings that fulfill that requirement, then we really feel that we have received some good Dharma. But if we get an opportunity to receive Dharma teachings that we consider more ordinary, run-of-the-mill Dharma, then we think to ourselves, this isn't really all that much. So we can bring this materialistic approach to our Dharma pursuits as well.
제자 이제 로마 이제 가시 용디 알았어. 로마 가시 아주 다 수승오마 잠주다 심지에 수사로 진짜게 라마드 제입니다. 안다디 치수 텔레시라라 지 아저 디시라라 딱 고지 가셔야지. 양 텔레 라마 텔레지 가셔야지. 체니라 체라 야나 지 양지 라마드 지 배지 more profound sort of teaching nange de chungmeimina and telea asar somro telegar chi di chele chu lama ningbathiso o tati lama de denji shirara chi thona mebchi ta mi shinda ke o tati lama di kyorang lama marves ki tv mina o tati ku zane ji jamdu de simgeji ma do ke shumes shirara mare do dorji diriji shinye de yongde yare.
And so some students of the Dharma, for example, might rely on a certain spiritual teacher in order to receive the refuge and bodhisattva vows, but later on they come to regard that level of Dharma transmission as too mundane, and they go searching for a different spiritual teacher, perhaps a teacher who has a bigger name, or a teacher who is willing to give them teachings that they consider to be more profound. They look for other teachers, leaving their original teacher behind. And then when individuals ask them, is this specific individual, aren't they your teacher? Then they respond by saying, oh, they're just someone who I received refuge and bodhisattva vows from. And in this way, they look down upon the teachers that gave them the teachings that they consider to be more mundane.
제가 다들 마무시에 뭐지? 예섬리아 appreciation 자디 계속 시라래 섬전. 디네 주산에 다들 베랑 베준 슈비입니다. 아주 넘기 지 베랑 우단으로 샤샤입니다. 아주 우르 데네 지 가서 이제 메르제션 자르부터 지요라. 디토네 아주 여기 레슨도 로종으로 지 램비입니다. 다 넘기 우단 사데 지당 아주 넘기 니만 딱봐 제신비기 고라 수부기 고라 니만 딱봐 제신비가 레가르제 데 미세게 요만 할레고 아스게 요만 규마 남윤기 고라 조단르제 아주 데 미세 토나스 케치 요만 참조 수수 우등이 하고 오면도 와 땅다 땅도 여러 봐 이네데 토나스 게 메자 우땅마다는 아주 남기 토나게 쩌요 다이네 시 우 중업을 미니 진짜에 가서다지 3天로 고명의 급 커돌이야 안신의지 우리야 포커스 체인 주산에 지지도 된 주산에 우 중국지에 우 동기에 당보 우 동기에 하고 우세아디 차지 원인바 배지 무튜네 방과지 반참 마체 지 동구에 된 아주 하고 라드네 우디 참체소나 아는 가서 지기 손보 네트야 매버지 이마 따디 하고 연주사네 신의 주그란 넘균 땅대야기 우다디 배지 레라고 쉬우지 우다대야디 오늘 전에지는 디 개시슈 디차대야지 아주 소소할 개시슈고 대인들지 대한 배지 컨디션도 디기 차견디 거두인에 대해 유효버릇이 아주 배주chen 미세 배주chen 유효고 다다 차견디 유효버릇이 인주산 되게 appreciation 쓰는다고 야나지 오늘 매도 좋은 거 사와지는 와서 서로지 되지 고 소화로 드리기로 되게 인주산 신의지 오늘 지 소소 디기 매버레민도 디기 다다지 디기 자원에 매버레민도 다다 우다야 돼야 디기 예전도 삼성로지 이 소화게 인주산에 디기 요알라 배미지 하려면 배지 가르쳐야지 배지 뭐라 지부르지야 칸바 지부르지 근데 과매지 근데 지기 니주 배 규마 레라고 근데 지기 내가 가서 디기 진토라
The main point is that, in my opinion, having appreciation is very important. Appreciation can help us to develop so many other positive qualities and connect us with a very profound experience of well-being. For example, the breath is often an object that we use to focus our minds in meditation. And we can learn a lesson from our breath, a very great, wonderful lesson. Breath is something that is happening all the time if we're alive. It's a basic function of our body. So from that perspective, there's no big deal about breathing. It's a very ordinary situation, something our body does all by itself, and we don't have to pay attention in particular in order for the breath to happen. We can be breathing and not even be particularly aware that we are breathing. But in meditation practice, in the practice of meditative concentration, we intentionally adopt the breath as a special object of our intentional focus. We place our attention intentionally upon the breath, and so instead of not being aware that we are breathing, we become intimately aware that we are breathing. And we place our attention on every single breath that passes by. And we try to have our attention rest on every single breath in an uninterrupted way. When we do this, certain insights naturally arise in our mind. We then come to appreciate the fact that this breath relies upon specific causes and conditions that make it possible. And if this breath were to cease, our lives would cease as well. At that point, we develop an appreciation for the breath in which we see it as something that's very simple and easy on the one hand, but on the other hand is extremely important to ourselves, to our continued living. It is something that's very necessary for us. And so when we have this insight, even though the breath is something simple, we also appreciate it as something beautiful, something amazing, something wonderful. That feeling actually dawns within us of this great appreciation. And when we have this appreciation, our attitude about what happiness is just might change. We might be able to then realize that in order to be happy, we don't necessarily need a particular type of car. We don't necessarily need a particular type of house. It might occur to us that just this very ordinary breath is filled with well-being and happiness in and of itself, and that is enough.
다들 인주사네. 다무샤 쇼모자. 간다 example 쉐. 안데 인주사네. 안마시 가상 아주지 conference sobre di katolia nyemo kolia chi nyemo tena somre. 다 디 kolia 시키지 방법 충분해. 세상 다 드린 주주대에서 인상 가상한데네 배 최체 안다지 로드 쉬는 지금에도 3정도.
Lassa? So that's just one example of how we might approach the path. And I think that in terms of our formal presentation, I can leave it at that for the time being. Yesterday, I participated in a conference, the topic of which was transforming disturbing emotions. So I think at this time, it would be good if I were to pick up some themes from that topic and continue to share some thoughts with you.
드린 인주사네. 다 지 담아 파드 사디 담 practice 사디 다 조조지 dealing with yourself. 다 지수 dealing 차 고경아 수수리야 컨디션제 가수듯이 다 랑랑이야 지 자람 컨디션이 봐. 다지 자바디 컨디션이 봐. 이걸 다 조르 차대요. 세상 상계에게 제장 능균에 지 랑게 자치슈스는 자도 깔에 하슈르디 지 수수기 이모셔널 딜링 차데 깔에 하슈르 차 수수수다 수수수 자세 서머 자치슈스는 자도 갑대 치슈르디 더 수수 차대야지 가르치 수수수 규차상 예비체 소 드린 주산에 디균자데나 다지 랑랑리아 지 가르다 지 이모셔널 토네 딜링 차데 갈레 카슈 most difficult 드립스트 차디요.
Lassa? As was mentioned before, the Dharma path is all about developing a relationship with ourselves and exploring the questions of how to relate with our own minds and our own experience properly. When we examine ourselves and our experience, we may find that our greatest challenge is actually within ourselves. The greatest challenge we face is our own painful emotions, our own disturbing emotions.
다 드린데 다 뒤준자는 되네 지 녀몽 지 최녀몽의 녀몽자 사나다 다 가나 지 녀몽 뒤에 망부시 송야래 다도 지 상계 최 탐지야로 지 녀몽 뒤에서 뭐 교부스나다 녀몽 뒤에 붙여도 뭐 송스 근데 매버지 아다 상물로 다지 정규 뒤에 사나다 랑기 지 emotional dealing 차第一个讲讲去做，那第几个对不起，都差点了。第二因啥？我就给全年的7课都里面呢，你记没记记？被卡起得了就卡的这确切的啥？卡起得了就马上了，卡哪都说，叔叔的这告诉他这牛毛的，大几 focus 起来是呢，告诉他 facing 起来了，第二这个起来了，他就懂吧的，开始下差点了。
That is why all of the Dharma that the Buddha taught focuses on methods to tame our destructive or disturbing emotions. It is said that there is no Dharma teaching of the Buddha that was not given for the purpose of taming the disturbing emotions or taming the mental afflictions. And so therefore, all Dharma relates to taming one's own mind stream, to dealing with the emotions. And the perspective that is emphasized is one of turning our attention inward, to face ourselves, to face our own emotional landscape, rather than turning our attention outward.
미신다게 지금 emotional이야 아주 드시야데 레라브레 지금도 니도스 다이는 수수기 그 emotional이야 다지 아주 주 카고르제 삼던도 사네 아니 드시야 또 없는 거야 지금 가라하고도 와
It's easy for us to face our attention outward and explain the emotional problems of others. If we direct our attention outward and single out other people, then it's very easy for us to say they have this emotional problem, they have that emotional problem, they have this or that flaw. But when we direct our attention inwardly toward ourselves, then all of a sudden it's not so easy to say things about where the problems are.
아주 그 뒤에는 excuse를 세체, 칠월 excuse를 세체, 다 아주기 지 emotional, disturb emotional 데 드시게 부터 다쳐다. 수수기 녀몽이 교회에서는 나도. 다디 내단한테 근데 좀부터 excuse 데 칠월 세체, 내를 때는 총송, 필리진의 총송사로 지시거래. 된담다 수수기 교회에 버스는 나도. 소소 니주 가르쳐 준 것이 수수 걔네지 안 되고 싫어요 말.
And so when it comes to our disturbing emotions, we are always looking for places to blame on the outside. Someone or something that we can point to and say, this is why I feel this way. They are the ones that caused this problem. They are the ones that made me have this difficult emotion. That is our habit, but the truth of the matter is that our emotions come from within ourselves. And so if we are experiencing emotional difficulties, the source of those emotions and the source of those difficulties is ourselves. That's a much more accurate description of the reality of of the matter, but it's difficult for us to accept this.
Then you say, free to speak, free to gasodaji, gasoji, samjar, shia free imba, maju free imba, maju rawanda, samjar rawanda, she you san. Tati rawandi, samolongazu, peju tonsarde, mishinda genga peju tangorba, mishinda chik, wataji samolo sudjiline, mitome sudjiline, ko she chores, karine, suzuki samjar, gishia karine, she chores. 이내 가지야 삼루지 당과 수술이야 수술권이 가르쳐야 되지 가르쳐라 수술기 묘목의捐下 될래 free 인지의 삼정도 that also free
Lare,
don't forget somewhere
lare.
제가 드린 주사네 디 freedom 대 수술 떼고도
Lasso. In many countries in our contemporary world, there's great emphasis on the concepts of freedom of speech and freedom of thought. And we hold these freedoms, and in many cases rightly so, to be very important. But sometimes it's funny when we look at how we use these freedoms. Of course, we are free to use our freedom of speech in any way we like and direct our statements to whoever we want to direct them to, whether they be people we consider to be high or people we consider to be low. We are free to speak our minds. But I think one thing we should also remember is that we're also free to look at ourselves and look at what our own flaws and confusions might be. So we're free to describe the faults of others, and that is fine and good. But we should also not forget that we're also free to describe our own emotional problems. And I think that we should take advantage of this freedom as well.
드린 주산 딱하다 아주지 배지기 내년 탐지지를 다사는 신기바 주주들 가난도 거지 주주아리 딱 용모발이야 년이야 가수래 년부 때야래 담보 교육이 가수래 남경아 excuse 차데 카치로 주면 가난도 거지 주주지 에너지 신의 가수라다지 수수에게 지시 심주치 하선한다도 야너지 서치하는 좀 고주과디 고주다는데 이제미지 가난도 거지 주주네 주야되는 고주과를 벌써 차득이 있어서.
So there is a slogan from the mind training teachings which says, drive all blames into one. And the one that is being referred to is one's own disturbing emotions or one's own negative emotions within oneself. The encouragement that's being given is not to find excuses on the outside, places to assign blame for our own disturbing emotions, but rather to turn our attention to the inside and look for the source of confusion and disturbance there. If we can do that, then we're really beginning our true search, our true research. So from the point of view of the Dharma journey, the true beginning point for our research or for our search for truth begins in this way.
계시 미참에게 수수수기 교인데 수수수 원시버지 제제 가난도 거 수수 원시버 차서서 신내지 코즈스 suffering 세나다도 강의 요한 기배 규즈 즉 오늘 전에 basic course 디 제쳐버려. 디 제쳐서는 아니 신이 거라지 따지 디 지부 동해를 타고지 용거를 마도베 다 인데기 basic causes condition 디베 제쳐 마다체 거주인이 미참에게 즉 카다스로 치료 경향 써야 되나 안디 니수기 가서지 녀도 용세기 시즈디 아니 잔 제쳐 마다나 아니 녀도 매차 매워서 그라하면서 미강으로 지기질이야 가르다시대
If we can turn our attention inward to focus on our own confusion and recognize our own disturbing emotions, then we can begin to truly identify the causes of suffering, the basic cause of all of our problems. We will be able to clearly identify that, and that's when what we call liberation from suffering starts to happen. If we do not do that, but keep our attention on the outside and continually blame others for our disturbing emotions, then it will be very difficult to get to the root of any of our problems. And we will be left in a state where it's simply a bunch of people casting blame on each other.
다지 녀몽데 가수변은 신기 지 가서다지 아주 디스터브지 녀몽 받친게 다되게 그래서 녀몽 다들 미라 방고 치셔야 다이미라 자외 녀몽 도숨 다들셔 디모숨 다디 디나는 모두버시 매비 인주사네 다는지 지 녀몽 도숨디 디나 모두버 야마라 저다 녀몽 도숨 셰 인주사네 셰랑 되샤 디모스도 셰야래 다대지 무슨 깔라도지 예대버스시 무슨야지 컨트롤사데 그지래 안 다는 신기지 identify some 컨트롤사데 그지 뭐시야 다는 신기지 컨트롤견 그지 뭐시야 사데 때지 레라르시 컨트롤데 무슨 되버스 인자 안지 디 지콩을 레라버시 다들에 되샤 디스카라하르시 지 거지 야고임배서지 양 참자 두고임배서지 타주가라 하버지 안다 디무사데 디모는 몽바레 드인두사네 아니 좀 고르 몽지 가린 디모 코랑 가린지 뭐스야데 가라 하버지 임배서시 디모 코랑 가린 뭐여 마신 주 코랑 주 마셔야 안 디모 견 가린 뭐스야 가라 하버도 다 남경 아주 집에서 시두산 다 망부시 시에요 남샤체 이나 무슨 소수에게 용화라 다 디모스두산에 디 오늘은 디모렌도 와서서로지 되지 뭐스야 돼 가보면서 something
From the traditional Buddhist perspective, there are many different types of disturbing emotions that are identified. And there can be quite elaborate presentations of these entailing various lists of primary and secondary disturbing emotions and so forth. But if we boil them all down to a condensed presentation, there are what we call the three poisons of desire, aggression, and bewilderment. So we can say that these three root poisons of desire, aggression, and bewilderment include all of the other lists and presentations of disturbing emotions that you could mention. All of them are included within these three. So if we look at them one by one, we can see that aggression, also sometimes known as anger, is the easiest to identify and the easiest to ascertain as problematic. Usually, more or less, we are aware of when we become angry. And roughly speaking, we have some awareness that it's a problem or a source of difficulty. But on the other hand, if you look at desire, it's a little bit more difficult to identify as problematic. Sometimes we see our desire as positive, and some other times we see it as negative, depending upon the circumstance. So desire is a little bit more challenging to recognize as problematic in comparison with aggression. And then bewilderment is of the nature of delusion, is of the nature of not knowing, lack of awareness. And so, of course, we're usually completely unaware that bewilderment is even present in our minds when it is present. So you could say it is the most difficult of these three to recognize. And since we can't recognize even its presence in our mind, we therefore have difficulty recognizing it as problematic or as a source of suffering or difficulty. It's not an obvious mental occurrence in our experience.
다 간다. 가서 다들 주주지 신다. 알아. 다 지기 가서다지. 녀모바 gyöngö sialia. 미신다 지기. 배지기 녀모베 꼴이야. 녀모비 지가서 꼴 드셔만 웃겨다. 지 녀모비 gyö 시에가 잠시기 디수수기 첩 지 수수기 가서다지 문제 전에 가서다지 수수人이기 외에 녀모비 gyö 무슨 마통 봐 디시도 다고라 고아잠 드시점을 마다베 시라시다 지기 motivation somebody 다지 진짜 지금 돈이 배 change 좀 채트야 가라 합시다 something 대주산에 다지 되게 드시기하셔 민 드시기하셔데 레벨 나로라 지 샤샤 시세를 지다 고아를 지 있으면 말도 띵문에 지니 지 민구교가 돼야지 수수 삼복구교가 돼야지 근데 차를 채버려야 된데 지 수수료야 지 semsor chike kurwa nyongwa chike kurwa de ma ge pardu ande de de sam ha de ara ma to be an di su su ki ta ji semsor la ya ba ta transform chi samare ta de che ta kausha inge sam tan do.
So ignorance or bewilderment is taught a lot about in the texts, and one can study a lot about it, but in one's own direct experience, it is difficult to recognize this is bewilderment. This is the mental affliction of bewilderment. So it is somewhat like that with all of the disturbing emotions as well, in the sense that we can gain a certain amount of understanding through having these points about the disturbing emotions explained to us. But until we directly recognize the disturbing emotions in our own experience, then a mere understanding intellectually will not really move our heart in a way that helps us to make a change. So for as long as our knowledge of the disturbing emotions remains in our brain as intellectual information, then it won't really move our heart. So we want to study ourselves in relation to these teachings about the disturbing emotions in a way that helps us to eventually move our heart so that we can actually make a change. Because that's the only way that transformation will happen.
打不起，打等你的就忙不起啥的，另一三打不起是啥？啊，这里去面到什么程度？
Lasso?
你生意好嘞，生意就往这个嘞，
Laon.
啊，生意学会的，啊，生意学会个嘞，啊嘞，啊嘞，广大。 广大王是小白公，广大王，看来还是多大。I think I already spoke something from 2 o'clock until 3:30. It's a long time. I feel boring. And tomorrow morning, then there are meditation, what? Instruction? Or what is it? Meditation session or something? What? Freedom to meditation?
Freedom through meditation.
Freedom to meditation.
Through meditation.
Through meditation.
Larry.
Freedom through meditation. Okay. This is freedom through meditation. Sounds a little bit serious, a little bit funny. Okay. Then afternoon we have empowerment. Which empowerment? Forgot. Menjushi. Are you sure? Okay. Sometimes some people believe, some people that truly believe I'm 900 years old. That's why my brain is not working very properly, because it's too old. Maybe my body is not too old, but my spirit, sort of, how to say, inside the, what is called that?
My insides.
My inside is very old. I think that sounds a little bit strange. Inside brain is, no? Inside body is very old, but maybe. Today you stand up, mang bu shi ta ji xie mo guo qian. Nan de le ji mo zhang.
Lasso?
Ai.
So I think that it's not necessary to say too much more at this time. We have the upcoming events that His Holiness has alluded to, and so I think we can conclude at this point for now.